All right, I think we'll get started. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today for the Student Research and Innovation Showcase hosted as part of the WiSys 2021 Spark Symposium virtual series. I'm Jennifer Souter, WiSys' Director of Patents and Licensing. For those of you not familiar with WiSys, we're a nonprofit supporting organization of the UW system. And at WiSys, we support research, we protect and market ideas, we inspire students, and we build culture, all with the goal of inspiring Wisconsin innovation. On behalf of WiSys, we are delighted to be able to feature UW System's students and researchers from all academic disciplines, as well as a broad range of campuses as part of this live broadcast. So today's presentations are going to be scored by a judging panel, and our presenting students will have the opportunity to earn cash awards for their efforts. Speaking of judges, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome our judging panel for today's event. I'd like to first welcome Keith Baxter, President of Boyle Frederickson Intellectual Property Law. Keith, you're most welcome.
Hi, good to be here.
Thank you. From WiSys, please welcome Deborah Lundeen, our Manager of Research Development. Thanks, Deborah. And last but not least, Dr. Anthony Varghese from UW River Falls. Thanks,
Hi.
Anthony. So today's first place winner will take home a cash prize of $1,000. Today's second place winner will take home a cash prize of $500. I'd like to now take this opportunity to thank our prize sponsors and longstanding partners at Boyle Frederickson and the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. We are grateful for your ongoing support and are really glad that you're able to be here with us today. Thanks again. So in addition to today's top prizes, all students taking part in this series of the student showcases will also be competing for the Tim Higgins Commercial Relevance Award, which will be announced during the August showcase late this summer. Today's winners, however, will be announced at the conclusion of this event. Now, without further ado, I am delighted to introduce our first group of presenters. Please join me in welcoming our first student presenter, Molly Hennig from Uw Oshkosh.
Thank you, Jennifer. It started with a video of a woman in a schoolgirl's outfit. The woman was the virtuoso singer Barbara Hannigan, and she was performing alongside the London Symphony Orchestra. The piece she was performing was George Ligoti's Mysteries of the Macabre, which, to the unprepared listener, sounds like a string of nonsense syllables, random patterns of notes, and shrieks that only dogs can hear. One would assume it would be impossible to learn and perform a piece like this, but Barbara sung it so beautifully that she received a standing ovation. My name is Molly Hennig, and in my time as a senior in the voice department at Uw Oshkosh under Dr. Anna Hersey, I wanted this piece to be the next one that I learned, and I wanted to document the entire process of learning it to show that it was possible for both student and professional musicians to learn a piece of this difficulty. Please advance slide. When a student musician first approaches a piece of difficult music, it's hard for them to know where to start. It's overwhelming for them to see the piece in its entirety and expect to understand all of it at once. It would be like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle just by looking at the pile of pieces. Not to mention that not having responsible practicing plans, musicians can develop a bad practicing habit, such as overlooking problem areas or repeating mistakes. And it's even more difficult to develop a responsible means of practicing and planning during times of remote learning, where in-person mentorship and supervision is impossible. In order to solve these practicing issues, I decided to develop a case study for responsible practicing by documenting my rehearsal process as I learned George Ligoti's Mysteries of the Macabre. Each time I practiced, I would write down what I accomplished during my session of practicing, what challenges I met along the way, and what tools or techniques I used in order to overcome these challenges. Please advance slide. The following is an example of learning a difficult rhythmic passage of the piece. In order to familiarize myself with the piece's meter, I tapped out each individual beat in each individual measure while speaking the text. I then began to speed up the passage while self-conducting the 7/8 pattern like so. Eventually, I was able to add the melody to the rhythm and sing it up to a performable tempo. This passage is one of many inconsistent and asymmetrical rhythmic patterns in this piece, but each one became learnable through the tools that I use, such as these. Please advance. Here is a difficult passage concerning the melody of the piece. A helpful way to learn a melody like this is to first play it out on a piano or another familiar instrument in order to become aware of what notes are correct. I also hummed the difficult passage as slow as possible to ensure smooth note transitions, and then I gradually increased the speed. When faced with a particularly challenging melodic section, I often add a tip that indicates a pattern in the intervals between the notes. In this case, the melodic contour of the passage is moving the notes closer and closer together, with the higher notes lowering and the lower notes rising. This tip was helpful enough for me to predict each upcoming note when singing through the passage, and in the end, I was able to perform the melody up to tempo. Please advance slide. Finally, there was another layer of difficulty in that I learned the piece's original German text rather than its English translation. As an example here, we see the German syllables Code 00 höchste Geheimnisstufe. Upon examination, the syllables form the words Code 0 höchste Geheimnisstufe. When literally translated, Code is German for code, 0 for 0, höchste for highest, Geheimnis means secret, and Stufe means stage or phase. The English translation reads coding 0 highest security grade, indicating a slight translation alteration that best fits with the English wording. Understanding what one is saying will solidify one's memory of a non-English text. In this case, the singer is sounding an alarm to the military, saying Code 0, highest security level. In time, my rehearsals of the Ligeti allowed me to sing confidently through a piece of music that has proved difficult even to professional singers, and I had a full record of how to achieve this confidence. It's my hope that my rehearsal diary on Mysteries of the Macabre by George Ligeti will inspire young singers to pursue more complex and challenging pieces of music, and that through this diary they have the tools in order to do so effectively on their own. Perhaps the next Barbara Hannigan can come from one student who received this kind of practicing guidance. Please advance slide. I would like to thank Carson Rose for being my pianist and collaborator in this project and for developing a piano recording of the Ligeti piece during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you to Dr. Richard DeCamp for looking through my word-for-word German to English translation of Mysteries of the Macabre. Thanks to Dr. Ellie Kullman for introducing me to works of the great 20th century Hungarian composers, as well as Ligeti's other piano works. I wish to thank my voice teacher and project mentor, Dr. Anna Hersey, for guiding my rehearsals of Mysteries of the Macabre. And finally, thank you to Dr. Stephen Kircher and the Office of Student Research and Creative Activity at Uw Oshkosh for funding and broadcasting my research on this piece.
Thanks so much, Molly. That's wonderful. Are there any questions from the judges? Could I ask you to turn your cameras and video on, please?
Oh, hi, I got to turn my camera, my video, and my microphone on, I guess all at the same time. So I don't know, I mean, I know a little bit about opera. This isn't one I know. Is there any way to see your performance?
I have a few recordings of the excerpts of the performance of the piece. I wasn't able to perform live due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I was only able to make some recording of a few excerpts of the piece, but I would love to perform it live at some point soon. If you would want to see a professional performance of the piece, I highly recommend Barbara Hannigan's performance with the London Symphony Orchestra. That piece stands alone on its own very well, but it is also a part of the opera Le Grand Macabre. There are a few performances of Le Grand Macabre that one can find. One is, in my opinion, not very tasteful. I would recommend the one that looks like it's being performed in front of an orchestra, not the one that is being performed in the opera hall. That one has dated a bit poorly.
Okay. I just had one more question. I don't want to monopolize, but when you did your rehearsal schedule, you basically found a way to, basically to optimize, I guess, your learning process. Is there anything you would change after having tried it?
I would say I would love to perform with an in-person pianist as soon as it becomes more safe to do so. That greatly improves one's overall comprehension of the piece, since the piano and the voice seem to clash very often, but with a lot of practice and rehearsal and understanding the rhythmic changes and rhythmic disengagement between the piano and the voice in the piece. That's something that only a great period of live rehearsal can help that with. So in time, I hope I could rehearse this live with an accompanist. I'm very grateful for Carson's recording of the piece because that greatly helps me with the comprehension of the piece. I would say that would be one thing I would change. I would rehearse with accompaniment a little bit more.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the judges?
Hi, Molly. I was going to ask, after each diary entry, how did you build from the notes that you took for each succeeding practice session?
Thank you for that question. That's a good question for me. I believe that I would often look back at the tips I used for melody, which certainly helped me. And I gained a good memory of what techniques I used in previous practice sessions, and I would adopt those into later practice sessions as to what I see was the most fit for that particular passage. In one case, there might be a rhythmic passage that was in 11/8 metric time. And I would remember that in other difficult rhythmic meters, self-conducting was a very good technique for me to use. So I would make a note that I would want to do that as a practice tool to overcome that particular challenge.
Dr. Varghese, any final questions?
No questions. Great work. I've just maybe one question just from my own curiosity. Why does the composer have so many different time signatures?
I think it adds to the overall frantic nature of the piece. The character is kind of meant to be a caricature of the police. It's a very satirical opera, and the character is meant to kind of be sounding an alarm because the plot of the play is that there's a bit of a doomsday happening, and she is frantically trying to either A, keep the information on the down low, and B, try to kind of make sure that the military moves as quickly as possible in order to mitigate the threat. So she is panicking in this piece, and I think the metric changes very much give a good imagery of that kind of panicked state of mind.
Thank you, Molly.
Great. Thanks again, Molly. Next up, I'd like to welcome Esther Janinga and Peyton Sanders from UW-Whitewater.
Hi, our project is called Estimating the Impact of Pore Pressure on Slope Stability. Our presenters are Esther Janinga and Peyton Sanders. Our mentors that helped with the project are Jup Bhattacharya and Oscar Vivasetin and Haijin Soon, with contributions from Brett Stack and Michaela Herberer. Please advance slide. Erosion along Lake Michigan shoreline tends to increase during the springtime, potentially leading to landslides. This can be caused by the moisture content percolating through the material, for example, sand and soil, which might create weakness. By using the Moore circle, we can understand slope stability as well as determine how much stress is needed to create these landslides. As seen in the picture on this slide, landslides on Lake Michigan are a serious problem that need to be addressed. Please advance slide.
Just to talk a little bit more about Moore circles. We have a few diagrams. The first one shown here up in the top right corner just depicts what a regular Moore circle would look like, showing the normal stress on a plane and the shear stress on a plane. Now, as we move forward, we have the second diagram here. Kind of starts out the same way. And we add in a failure envelope, and to figure out how to get this failure envelope, you need the angle of phi and sigma 0, as you see in blue and red on the screen. As you see the green dotted lines on the screen there, they go over and they hit the red dot that intersects the circle with the failure envelope. When you have your circle touch the failure envelope, that creates slope failure, which basically means that you're going to have a landslide there. Now, what we're working on here with the bluffs on Lake Michigan eroding away into the water, we would start out with this red circle here, and that would be a non-eroded bluff there. But as the circle moves closer, as water gets put into these pore spaces in the soil, it moves the circle over to the point where it will actually have slope failure and it will collapse. Advanced slide, please. So landslides are caused from a slope failure when extra water is added to sand in real life, as rain and snow. These diagrams represent what happens when water seeps into the sand and freezes to form ice, which expands spaces between the sand grains during the winter. When the ice thaws during the spring, it allows the water to move through these spaced out areas from the ice pushing them apart. And when the water moves through these wider areas, it creates that slope failure, and it creates those landslides, as well as the crashing waves. And they drag the slope back into the lake, weakening the bottom of the slope, and it alters the stability. Advanced slide, please.
When too much water percolates into sand, the pore pressure of the water increases. This separates out the sand grains and makes the overall slope weaker. When the external weight, such as buildings and tall trees, are added on the sand, failure can occur. In addition, undercutting at the base of the slope is a result of rising water levels and waves crashing along the shoreline, which eats away at the slope. The crashing of waves drags sand back out into the lake, weakening the bottom of the slope, altering the stability of the slope. Advanced slide, please.
Ultimately, this project is important because of the safety precautions that can be taken by monitoring the shorelines. The project aims to protect lives and property damage from the shoreline erosion. By knowing the rate at which the water seeps through the material, in this case, the sand or soil, the moisture content after the freeze-thaw cycle in the spring, and movement from saturated to unsaturated zones that can make slopes unstable, we can prepare for possible erosional areas. This project not only applies to Lake Michigan, but also to all other coastlines across the globe. We expect that this project will continue and advance in the coming future so we can predict landslides potentially and mitigate damages. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Esther and Peyton. Could I ask our judges to turn their video and audio on, and if there's any questions?
So I'm getting really whipsawed between opera and soil erosion. But I just had a question. So this circle construct, is that a recognized approach to this, or is it something you developed or helped figure out, or did you apply it to these circumstances?
So yeah, so this is already this is like a known concept. It's part of structural geology, and it basically just it helps you figure out how much force is being applied to a given surface.
And so what do you see as a positive? I mean, obviously you haven't solved the erosion problem yet, and that's perfectly okay. But where do you see this going hypothetically? I mean, what would be your next step?
Well, it's all been basically theory so far due to COVID. We haven't really been able to get out into the field and actually do very many experiments. But within the coming future, we expect to be able to get out, take some trips, collect actual data, and you know, kind of go out to the public and let them know what areas are more dangerous than not.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Esther or Peyton, how would you evaluate whether there is danger or not?
It all depends on like the soil underneath and how much the water is actually affecting that soil. You never know if the ground is gonna collapse or not for sure, but you can definitely tell if there's a lot of activity in a certain area, or if the numbers that you collect dramatically change in a short amount of time. You can definitely tell that something's going on, and you can definitely warn people about that.
Do people use satellite data to do the same kind of diagnosis?
I mean, I guess you could use satellite data for it. We've never really gotten into that, but because we're more like hands-on, like going to like specific areas. That would be something to look into, but we just have not talked about that.
Good work.
Thank you.
Great. Deborah, any final questions?
I guess I was going to ask about what would testing or exploration look like while in the field when you guys were able to go out.
Could you repeat that, please?
I think the question was, what would testing look like once you're able to go out into the field?
So we've already started a little bit of testing on our own manual in our lab setting here on campus. Obviously, we're not going to get the same results as in the field, but something that would look like would be we would plan on going and collecting some of the actual soil that is out there to bring back to the lab and kind of use that as a basis to get some starting numbers to look at, and then potentially go back out there and kind of go back to the same area along the lake to just monitor a certain area.
Great. Thanks so much, Esther. Thank you, Peyton.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Riley Sassy from UW-Platteville. Riley, you're most welcome.
Just 1 second, adjusting. All right. Hello, my name is Riley Sassy. I've just graduated from UW-Platteville with a chemistry major and a math minor. My advisor is Dr. Mohammed Rabbani with the Department of Chemistry, and our project is modifying cotton fabrics with metal organic frameworks for antibacterial applications. Next slide, please. So there is a high demand for antibacterial fabrics that has only been increased by the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, people think of masks, but medical personal protective equipment can range from masks, gloves, to an entire full body suit. So those being antibacterial adds another layer of protection rather than just a physical barrier. And we know that metal organic frameworks can anchor to a cotton fabric. That is established research. And so if we functionalize these metal organic frameworks with groups that have antimicrobial properties, we can effectively attach an antimicrobial group to the fabric, rendering the fabric antimicrobial. Next slide, please. So, as we've probably all seen or heard, the active ingredient in hand sanitizer is ethanol, which is also the alcohol in alcoholic beverages. And the reason that ethanol is our active ingredient in hand sanitizer is because it has two parts: a hydrophobic or lipophilic part, meaning it's both water hating and fat loving, and a hydrophilic or water loving part. This works as an antimicrobial agent because the lipophilic part can penetrate the fatty cell membranes, the lipid bilayer, and attach to them. And then when you wash your hands using water, the hydrophilic part will then attach with the water and wash away. And the water will be then pulling all of the different ethanol molecules in different directions, thus ripping the membrane apart and killing the microbe. Next slide, please. So the composition of cotton is that it is a glucose polymer called cellulose, which is pictured on the right here. That blue OH group is an alcoholic hydroxyl group. And what many people might be thinking, and a common question that our group has gotten is, if cotton already has an alcoholic hydroxyl, why isn't it a disinfectant? And the reason is because there is no lipophilic part. Both of these parts are necessary for the antimicrobial properties to work, because with no lipophilic part, this cotton cannot attach and attack to the fat membrane. Next slide. So the objective of this project is to use this blue OH group as a site for nucleating the moth crystals. So we want to grow a crystal on this group and then be able to attach an antimicrobial agent to this crystal. And so these over here are Moths, metal organic frameworks. So on the right, the sort of the pound symbol, hashtag symbol, is sort of a zoomed out view of a moth, a metal organic framework. And so this yellow and these orange balls are not part of the moth. These are illustrating the different pore sizes. So moths are mostly empty space, which is why they work very well in a networked material like cotton. And then over on the right is a close-up of a moth, and those blue parts are the copper, and those white and red parts are our ligand, which is the organic or carbon-based portion of the metal organic framework that is forming this network shape. Next slide, please. So in order to nucleate these moths on cotton, we first treat it with sodium chloroacetate. So that's our first step. We've got the Cl and all of the red over here with our oxygens. And what that does is attach a carboxyl group pictured with those red oxygens attached to the polymer labeled carboxymethylated cotton fiber. Wow, English is difficult today. So this is an active site. It has this nice negative charge here, which will be very attractive to our metals. And it is a site that the crystals will easily come to and want to nucleate on. And so then we repeatedly alternate treatments of a copper solution and an organic ligand solution. In this case, we're using benzene tricarboxylic acid, or BTC, pictured right next to our beaker of BTC. And alternating this enough times will eventually form layers and layers of these moth crystals saturating the cotton fabric. Next slide, please. The progress we've made so is we started with a plain cotton fabric. We treated it with the sodium chloroacetate. That's not super exciting. It looks the same. I mean, it is, but it looks the same visually. So we have our treated cotton fabric. We then treat it first with our copper ions, and copper 2 ions are known for being blue. So this cotton does have a slight blue color, but then the interesting part is what happens when we treat it with our benzene tricarboxylic acid ligand, which is this blue. This is a real photo we took. This is not edited. This blue gets super bright and a saturated color, even though we've dipped it in a colorless solution. If anything, you would expect the solution to become lighter. And this is indicating that crystals are starting to form. Next slide, please. So our next steps would be to functionalize this with an alcoholic molecule. So our proposed finished structure is what's pictured here on the bottom right. And as you can see, we have our OH, and right below the OH, that symbolizes a carbon group, which would be something that is lipophilic. We'll then use MOFSAT cotton to study the antimicrobial properties against E. coli, everybody's favorite test microbe, and then to also test this product's durability. These would be valuable whether they're single use or whether they're able to be washed, but that is something that we'd like to learn about. Next slide, please. So in summary, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, but especially now, there is a demand for antimicrobial personal protective equipment for use in medical settings. And amphiphilic groups such as ethanol have these antimicrobial properties. We are able to anchor them to moths, and we are able to anchor moths to cotton. We have nucleated moth onto our fabric, and in the future, we will be functionalizing these moths to add the antibacterial properties to the cotton, and we will then test those properties and quantify them. Next slide, please. I would like to acknowledge my collaborators in the Rabbani group, David, Bobby, Trevor, and Jalen. Dr. Mohammed Rabbani, who I believe is here today as our PI and mentor, and of course the UW-Platteville Chemistry Department and WiSys. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Riley. I could ask our judges to come on board, and if there are any questions, please address them now.
Riley, good work. Do you end up with a conducting surface that can conduct charge or heat or things like that?
We have not tested that.
Okay.
However, it is mostly non-polar. The vast majority of the structure of this was carbon-based, and the metals are pretty few and far between. So I would not expect it to be able to conduct charge very effectively.
Okay.
So the actual antimicrobial property is from the alcohol that you functionalize with at the end, and the metal, I don't even know what it was. The metal cage structure is just to attach it. Is that correct?
Yes, so the antimicrobial functionality comes from both the alcohol or OH group, and then right next to that alcohol group, a non-polar group, such as we're using a carbon group. Those being near each other is what creates the antimicrobial functionality. The metal organic frameworks, we can't attach ethanol to cotton directly. It won't work. It won't have, there's not really a reliable reaction mechanism for that, but there is one for nucleating these crystals onto the cotton, the metal organic frameworks, and then attaching ethanol to that.
Okay, so you give me the best. Oh, go ahead.
Like a like a carabiner where you attach one rope to another.
Yeah,
that's the function of the moth.
Looks like a carabiner. You had the best explanation of a hand sanitizer I've ever heard. I had no idea how that worked, but you had a fat-loving and a water-loving portion. Do you still have that? Are you still duplicating that with your functionalized alcohol? You've
Yes,
got the.
can you go back a slide?
Oh, that's because the alcohol has both of them on it. Is that right? Okay, got it.
Go back one more slide. There we are. So in this finalized structure, do you see the blue OH?
Yep.
So below that black line, that represents a carbon group. So those two being next to each other, that is actually the structure of ethanol, just attached to a lot of other things.
Got it. Got it. So you build this into like surgical gowns and things like that.
That's the goal, yes.
Okay.
Great. Any final questions for Riley?
If we could go back to the acknowledgements.
I was just going to ask, so what would an E. coli test look like when you would apply it to this, your antimicrobial fabric? What would you expect to be an outcome if it were successful? Like, what does it do? I'm not in chemistry, so that would be helpful.
Okay, so this, I'm not really a biochemist. This is not a part of the research that I'm involved in, but what I would expect is that we would grow some E. coli, treat, like have two identical Petri dishes of E. coli, and obviously this would be replicated a lot, treat one with this fabric and one without, and compare the numbers of bacterial colonies.
I'd like to now welcome our next presenter, Jessica Smith from UW Superior. Jessica, you're most welcome.
Christopher Columbus and his men abducted, traded, and sold Indigenous women and girls for sexual exploitation. They were the first known sex traffickers of the Americas, making sex trafficking of Indigenous girls and women a central component of the colonization of the Americas. Missing and murdered Indigenous women is an epidemic that is plaguing Indigenous people, and it has been since colonial contact. This has continued through the boarding school era. 215 children were just found this week in a mass grave in a boarding school in Canada. This is human trafficking by the US government, and this still continues in the form of child protective services and the foster care system, as well as the shipping industry and extractive industries such as the Line 3 pipeline. This is part 2 of a research that I have done titled The Survivor's View on Missing and Murdered Indigenous People, a healing journey of raising survivor and grassroots warrior voices, the correlation between pipelines in the shipping industry and human trafficking. I am a survivor of human trafficking, which is why I researched this and why I aim to lift up the voices of survivors and the people who are doing the work on the ground, because it's all too often that our voices are silenced. Next slide, please. Trafficking in Minnesota gets swept underneath the rug. Not even the governor seems to care what is going on with the Line 3 pipeline, as we had a petition that had over 500 signatures on it, exposing the trafficking correlation to the pipeline, and he was completely silent on the issue. Although American Indian women and girls make up only 1% of the state's population, from 2010 to 2018, 8% of all murdered women and girls in Minnesota were American Indian. From 27 to 54 American Indian women and girls in Minnesota were missing in any given month from 2012 to 2020. St. Louis County Duluth, Minnesota website is a shameful erasure of Indigenous women because their website has missing and not forgotten, but none of the women who are missing from the area are listed on that website. And the vague statistics and the vague things like Lake Superior Duluth Ship Canal never found, washed off in a pier in a storm, proves to me that they do not care to even keep track of missing people in the area. Next slide, please. For this research study, I used mixed methods to find the scope of the problem and the solution. 94% of the people that I surveyed know someone or have experienced violence personally in their area surrounding extractive industries. These photos were taken from a protest that we had at the Governor Mansion, that we had personally delivered the petition that had over 500 signatures on it. And the governor did not say a single word and was completely silent on the issue. Exploitation has been directly linked to Enbridge workers in an undercover trafficking sting where 2 out-of-state pipeline workers were arrested for attempting to solicit sex with minors. Next slide, please. 78% have been met with force while peacefully protesting. 72% feel that the police are protecting the pipeline and not the people that they sworn to protect. An astounding 95% feel that the police ignore signs of human trafficking and could be doing more to prevent exploitation and trafficking surrounding extractive industries. 77% feel that their right to protest has been violated. Next slide, please. The solution lies in following the mandates set forth by the Minnesota Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force report. I interviewed Senator Mary Kunesh for this report, and she founded the Minnesota Task Force and has dedicated her career in legislation and in the Senate to MMIW, but since has been repeatedly shut down in her efforts to make an impact on ending the missing and murdered Indigenous women's crisis. The first mandate, the main mandate of the task force, was to create an office to ensure that the rest of the mandates were followed. And the office would have been 3 years, but it was shut down because they didn't want to fund it. So to me, that proves that they just do not care about the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, because money is more important than the lives and the children and the women who go missing and get murdered in this state. Mary Kunesh Podine has been an incredible advocate within the Senate, and I am extremely honored to know her and to work beside her and to have her a part of this research, because she is making waves in Congress, even though she is facing extreme barriers. Next slide. As for my future work, I am a legal studies student. I want to hold the justice system and the government accountable. I'm a survivor of human trafficking, and as a member of the Criminal Justice Honor Society, as the UWS Newman Civic Fellow, as a mother who doesn't want to see her child go missing, I'm doing everything in my power to hold these systems of oppression accountable. What happens to our land happens to our people. Thank you to everybody who took part in my research, the Minnesota Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force, and the University of Wisconsin, Dr. Chantel Norgard. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Could I ask our judges to come online, please? And if there's any questions.
So what do you see as the most fruitful way to move forward? Are you looking at legal action or grassroots publicity, or what have you taken from your experiences here?
Both, really. There's a lot of grassroots organizations who are doing excellent work with the issue, working directly with families, because the government and the justice system does not protect or does not provide services for families. So I work for Sovereign Bodies Institute, and we support families directly, whether that be with financial assistance or helping them find legal assistance, or helping them with their law enforcement and having to work with law enforcement in the cases, because a lot of times law enforcement is not doing their job.
So you have, and that's something I didn't realize, but you're addressing sort of the policy issues, but also the individual level, people who've had troubles, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, Jessica, I was just going to ask you about the data collection part. Was it, you said it was it surveys, and then, you know, how did you reach your survey populations?
Yeah, I did a survey, and then I interviewed there's 4 total women that I interviewed, and they're all on the Minnesota Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force. This is part 2 of kind of this big research project that I've been doing. And I already have a national network of people that I work with personally. I'm on Survivor Leadership Council for Sovereign Bodies Institute. And so I just reached out to my network and spread the survey that way.
How many or what was your survey completion rate? Did you have a good turnaround for it?
There were about 30 responses.
Okay. Thank you.
Any final questions?
Jessica, is the same kind of problems faced in North Dakota too?
Yes, everywhere in the country and in Canada is facing these problems very, very extremely. North Dakota is probably one of the worst states. I would say between North Dakota and Montana have the highest rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Good work, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for your presentation. All right, next up, we have Stacy Sparks from Uw Oshkosh. Stacy, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer. Greetings, my name is Stacy Sparks, and my research is titled Navigating Seats of Mind in Jane Austen's Persuasion. Persuasion presents in Anne Elliot a heroine who is easily misunderstood. That is the first line of my paper, and while I won't be reading the 24-page research essay, this is a great entry point because it explains the why for my research. I encountered this text in a class taught by my mentor, Dr. Manning, the 19th century British novel. And I had an encounter with the heroine that made me ponder that there were different ways of understanding her from the instinctive initial ways one might read her. You see, Anne can appear quite passive, but as I continued to study the text, I became increasingly convinced that this was not an accurate interpretation or a full portrait. The novel was full of cues, and I was provoked to investigate further. Advance slide, please. So my primary methodology for my research was close reading of the text itself, noticing details, patterns, themes, both content and form, and seeking to make sense of the novel as a whole. I also had to develop a number of different literacies, as you can see here from this slide, whether reading about 18th century history to understand culture, events, or marriage law, reading literature on land ownership and landed gentry, researching a book called The Baronetage, which I'll mention a little bit more later. It's a historical book from the time, and it is through which we enter into the novel's action. I also read literary scholarship as an apprentice scholar, seeking to dialogue with those who have researched Austen and her work and the novel itself. I also read about the philosophy of the time, specifically the moralists and the poets who are mentioned on Persuasion's pages, and also examined psychological practices in my consideration of states of mind. Advance slide, please. So what I found is that Persuasion is frequently read and approached as a traditional courtship narrative, and scholarship has often faulted Anne for being persuaded to part with the man courting her, Frederick Wentworth. Her decision to be persuaded is frequently interpreted as an indicator of weakness or passivity in her character. Now, I'm not arguing that Persuasion is not a courtship narrative, but my essay seeks to reframe the approach given the examination of Anne's character in the text itself. Advance slide, please. I propose Persuasion as a mental courtship and argue that to interpret Anne as passive or weak is to fail to see that her courtship with her suitor is secondary to the text's primary preoccupations, her active mind and her courting herself mentally through adversity. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, courtship recalls both a place that one goes to, historically a royal court, and the act that takes place there, that of paying courteous attention in order to woo or invite into. Anne's mind is figuratively the court that she frequently most goes to, and where much of the novel's action takes place. And it is the primary recipient of such courteous attention as she seeks to navigate her circumstances and others' volatile states of mind. And I say that while Anne can seem rendered passive by her circumstances, the novel's attention to her active mind suggests agency and strategy in the way that she negotiates daily life. Advance slide, please. From the very beginning of the novel, Anne is defined as having an elegance of mind. And this is in stark contrast to her father, Sir Walter, of whom the narrator declares in the opening pages, vanity was the beginning and end of Sir Walter Elliot's character. And I argue that this vanity extends to his state of mind, specifically with his fixation on the baronetage. This is a listing of England's baronets, of which he is included. Historically, there was some tenuous status there. And so his fixation is something that is implied to be out of proportion. And it has very real material consequences. His state of mind in being fixated on this book imposes a loss of his actual material estate as a landed owner. Now, the novel informs that Anne perhaps has what we might easily take as escape from this situation with a proposal from a suitor. However, she is notably persuaded by a friend and mentor. And this is where many of the interpretations and scholarship deem her passive or weak, or as Wentworth states himself, is a result of over persuasion. He also calls her timid and weak. However, I argue that the marriage law of 1753, of which Austen would have been well aware of, forbid those to marry without the consent of their parents. Anne is a 19-year-old woman in the year 1806, and so her persuasion can be seen as a gentle, as effective navigation of legal restriction. And it's only at Novel's End that Wentworth's angry pride has been navigated, and we are assured that he's not another Sir Walter to be endured. Advanced slide. So ultimately, I argue Persuasion is a novel which primarily portrays not a suitor's courtship of a woman, but a woman's courtship of her own mind. Thank you all for your attention, and I'd like to specifically say thank you to my mentor, Dr. Manning.
Thanks so much, Stacy. If I could ask our judges to come online and address any questions.
I talk too much, so I'm going to let someone go first, but I do have a question.
I would just ask if this type of analysis would probably hold for any of her other writings as well.
I think that you could make that argument, certainly, and a lot of the scholarship that I examined to support this argued that for as much as she's regarded as kind of a romance novelist, if you want to say it that way, her heroines all prize things more dearly than romance, and frequently that is the mind. So it certainly is supported, but I do think it would be an interesting a way to look at her other novels. This novel in particular, however, because of the nature of the heroine, is she is frequently just seen as very passive, as opposed to, like, you know, Elizabeth Bennet of Pride and Prejudice. And so there is kind of an interesting take. She isn't even dialoguing until like the 3rd chapter of the book. She's literally seemingly absent. And so part of my argument is her presence throughout. So there's an argument for the rest of the literature and then specifically for this text.
Did you find any other previous literature that examined this particular novel that I guess sees it differently?
For sure. I mean, so, you know, with Austen, of course, there's no shortage of literature. And so that was quite overwhelming. So I would say that historically the trend has been to misstate the persuasion. There have been a few that have considered differently, and specifically in 2003, there's more of a shift with Peter Knox Shaw as one that I referenced that talks about, well, what about Wentworth's place here? It's just sort of assumed, I guess, that he's you know, perhaps we could term it innocent in all of this. And so there's more of an examination of his character. And there's also really interesting literature that, you know, talks about how Austen writes in a way that actually makes the reader want to misunderstand Anne at first. But what's very interesting is by Novel's End, and a lot of the literature I'm studying, is that they're not seeing those points that she makes. Nowhere did I find someone pointing out this marriage law that actually would have prevented her. And frequently I found, well, if she was, you know, really in love, she would have gone for it or something like that, kind of ignoring Wentworth's character. So it's a really interesting kind of presentation, and there's lots of information on both sides.
Thank you, Stacy.
So when I come to this sort of literature, which I like, I always read it sort of as a modern. But you looked into some of the laws. You talked about the marriage law, which informs our interpretation. Is there anything else that you picked up while you were digging through this that you think that startled you as a necessary, you know, understanding in order to understand this, at least as a contemporaneous reader? I mean, things that you saw in the. I'm fascinated by your looking back at history and the laws.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So one thing that I think is really fascinating, and I didn't have time to get into, is considering persuasion as a virtue, as an asset. And of course, that can be a bit hard to argue, I think, in our era of critical thinking and arguing, but I think there is a time to be persuaded. We've all recently been through a pandemic, and so, or still in a pandemic. And so I think if you say, could you be persuaded, for example, to wear a mask or to vaccinate? So this idea of persuasion as an asset or a virtue, and that's a very fascinating thing to get into, as well as theory of the mind. There's a lot of research that novels like this, specifically Austen's, that that include this kind of narrative that she has, produce empathy, help produce antisocial traits, and that's been verified. I mean, it's been so kind of thought-provoking that people have come out against it, re-verified. So it's just a fascinating thing to consider in our era, all the way in 2021. You know, could we consider persuasion in a new light? And I think we're so frequently moved to be like, if someone's persuaded, they're weak-minded. And I think this novel actually argues the opposite and is a really interesting argument for our
That
time.
is interesting, especially Americans. We have this like sense of individuality, right? It's counter to persuasion.
Yeah, and as an education major, I think we teach critical thinking. I think that's great. You know, I think we might be reaping what we sow with some of the things we see. And I think teaching critical acceptance of facts, you know, might also be something to focus on. And that was an interesting thing that came out of this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any final questions? All right, well, thanks so much, Stacy. Appreciate your presentation. All right, last but not least, our final presentation for today is from Rafi Trask from UW La Crosse. Rafi, you're most welcome.
Thank you. Oh, 1 sec. Okay, now good. Okay, thanks. For centuries, humans have pondered whether life exists beyond Earth, and we are actually getting closer to finding an answer thanks to recent advancements in the study of planets residing outside of the solar system, known as exoplanets. Today, I will be talking to you about how I searched nearby exoplanets for extraterrestrial intelligence. And to begin, there are 3 simple questions to consider when searching for life: where to look, what to search for, and how to find it. Please advance slide. The fact that life exists on Earth at all makes Earth-like planets good places to look for extraterrestrial life. And based on recent estimates, there are actually more Earth-like planets in the universe than grains of sand on all of the world's beaches and deserts. Leading the discovery effort is the NASA TESS satellite, which searches for Earth-like planets around nearby stars. And since 2018, TESS has found thousands of these planets, which it calls targets of interest, or just simply TOI. My research searched for life on these TOI. Please advance. TOI can be probed for life in many ways. Typically, this involves searching for the telltale signals that life leaves in the atmosphere, biomarkers, but these alone cannot guarantee the presence of even simple life. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, known as SETI, takes a more conclusive approach that instead looks for technological civilizations. And the idea here is simple. Evidence of extraterrestrial technology is evidence of extraterrestrial life. These are known as technological signatures or technosignatures. Earth-like civilizations are likely to possess wireless communication networks, and a common technosignature to search for are the radio frequency signals that they use. Some examples on Earth are satellites that provide GPS or broadcast TV and radio, mobile networks that give you talk and text, among others. And these systems inevitably leak some of their signals into space. And the detection of these signals would then uniquely imply the presence of life. Moreover, a civilization living on a TOI may even deliberately transmit signals into space as a radio beacon for others to pick up. And these TOI are great sites to search because they possess special geometries, which increase the likelihood of detecting technosignatures from them. Technosignatures are the traditional MO for Breakthrough Listen, the $100 million most comprehensive SETI project to date, a 10-year initiative launched in 2015 by Yuri Milner and the late Stephen Hawking. I conducted this research as a summer intern for Breakthrough Listen at the UC Berkeley SETI Research Center. Please advance. To search a TOI for technosignatures, we use radio telescopes. And this search can be a tricky endeavor because the telescope also picks up radio signals from Earth's own wireless communication networks. And these signals are virtually identical to technosignatures, which poses a problem. The only difference is where they originate. And while interference from Earth has a ubiquitous presence in the sky, technosignatures from a TOI will come from a specific location in space and are only visible when the telescope is looking at the TOI in certain regions of the sky. For each TOI, 6 observations were conducted, following an ABA-CAD cadence, shown on the left. The red boxes show hits found by the telescope and are individual pieces of a larger signal. The location of these hits distinguishes signals from space, technosignatures, and signals from Earth. interference. The bottom line is that signals with hits that populate only the A observations are likely to be technosignatures, but signals with hits present in the B, C, and D observations are likely interference from Earth. Breakthrough Listen uses an algorithm to perform millions of these identifications during the analysis. And to conduct my search, I modify the analysis software to be compatible with the Google Cloud environment and lay the foundation for the future cloud-based searches. Please advance slide. I searched for the presence of technological civilizations in 28 Earth-like planets at 4 different frequency ranges, and is the most comprehensive search over 1 to 11 gigahertz, with previous searches only probing from 1 to 2 gigahertz and 1 to 3 gigahertz. In addition to be one of the deepest SETI searches to date, it was Breakthrough Listen's first search to use cloud-based computing. And so my project represents a new opportunity to analyze data across a wider frequency range on a promising new target sample, that is the TOI, and ushers in a new era of SETI technosignature searches. Breakthrough Listen is also planning to search 100 nearby galaxies for technosignatures, and I will be leading the search, which will be conducted over this summer. Unfortunately, while the algorithm detected a non-zero number of technosignatures, these were further inspected visually, and unfortunately, no signals were found. Please advance slide. My research culminated in a first author paper, which was recently published into the Astronomical Journal. I would like to thank my co-authors for their helpful guidance and contributions throughout this endeavor. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rafi. Can our judges come online, please, and address any questions?
So in your cadence of A, B, C, the slide's gone now, but what is it that, what dimensionally differentiates the A's from the B's and the C's? Can you tell sort of overview of what?
That's a great question.
Yeah, okay.
So if you see the diagram on the bottom right, I didn't have time to go over that, but in the diagram on the bottom right, we can see a telescope that's pointing at different stars. So A, B, C, and D. Star A is the TOI, or the star that has a TOI orbiting around it. And it's from this star, and it's these designations are the same designations that you see in the cadence on the left. So A observations panels with A on them correspond to one of the telescopes looking at the TOI. B is when it's looking at somewhere else on the sky. And so we don't expect to see a technosignature. And then we look back at A again, and if a technosignature is there, then we should see a signal. And same thing happens with C. We shouldn't see anything, but we should see it again when we look back again.
I got it. So if you see it in multiple places, that suggests it's not originating from your TOI.
Yes.
And if it disappears, then it's just gone.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And that's good.
Okay. And visually, how do you, when you've got these false positives, how do you visually know that it's not a technosignature?
Yeah, so the algorithm has a certain power threshold for its hits, so that all the hits are in red on here. Mm-hmm. And so you can actually see that some of the hits, although they're classified as hits on here, but if you can see on like the panel B, maybe a couple faint kind of splotches here and there forming a line. Those are all actual like still signals, but they're below the threshold that the algorithm says it's something that's there. And so when we look at them visually, we can see, oh, there's definitely a signal there. Like it's just too low for the algorithm to see.
Oh, I see. Visually, you're visually looking at the radio frequency
yes.
Image. Okay, I got it.
This is exactly what
you're not looking for buildings.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Great. Any questions?
I was going to ask, about the volume of data that you would have to look at. I mean, is this an ongoing process where, hits and data are recorded, 24/7, and then how do you select the data that you're going to be analyzing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have 20% of the time on one of the largest radio telescopes that's in West Virginia, and when we observe, that data is basically sent over to a data center in Berkeley, and all the data is just kept there. And now this is like petabytes of data, and so So after, but data is only, we're only seeing data, we're only getting data when we're actually observing. The data is stored in the data center that, and the large volumes of data, right? It's every single observation creates massive files, and the reason why why my Google Cloud compatibility is so important is that as right now, as Breakthrough Listen expands into more telescopes, they're going to be getting more data, and the cloud allows us to analyze data as quick as it's coming in, so we don't get any backup. So you're right. The data storage is definitely a big problem that we need to address.
So you're looking at data though in real time as it's
So
recording?
it's afterwards, usually we collect. I think each observation is like 30 minutes, and so usually we collect data, and once we've collected data for enough data, we just kind of say, okay, yeah, let's look at this. But there are usually benchmarks where previous searches have looked for over thousands of stars, or going up. We can't start looking at the data until we get data for 100 galaxies. And so it's kind of arbitrary where we decide when and where we decide to start analyzing the data.
Thanks, Rafi.
Great. Any final questions, Dr. Verghese?
No questions. Nice work, Rafi.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, Rafi. That was wonderful. All right, welcome back, everyone. Sorry for the delay. The judges were having a very difficult decision to make, so we appreciate your patience. Hope the discussion went well, and I'm really glad to be able to soon announce the winners of today's Student Research and Innovation Showcase. Really want to congratulate all of the students who presented today and the campuses that they represented. Also to any of our faculty mentors who are here with us today supporting their students. Thanks for all you do on campus, and thanks for providing these students with the opportunities to do this research. Again, very difficult decision for the judges, so I don't relish their decision. But again, on today's prizes, I want to again thank our prize sponsors at Bull Fredrickson and Wharf. The first place winner will again take home a cash prize of $1,000, and the second place winner will take home a cash prize of $500. Again, courtesy of our prize sponsors here. Students, please be prepared that if your name is called, we'd like you to turn your video on for a quick wave. I'd also ask the two award winners to stay behind for a quick screenshot picture that we can use in publicity. So thanks very much for that. So now the moment we will all have been waiting for, I'm pleased to announce that the second place winner of today's presentation is Molly Hennig from Uw Oshkosh. Molly? Congratulations, Molly. All right, and our first place winner of today's competition is Stacy Sparks from Uw Oshkosh. Congratulations, Stacy.
Thank you so much.
So congratulations again to everyone. Really well done on the presentations. On behalf of WiSys, I want to thank you all for joining us today. We do hope you enjoyed the sessions and the networking. Remember, the conversations don't have to start here. Please let us know if there's anything we can do to help facilitate next steps. We do have a great lineup of events for the remainder of our virtual series, and I encourage you to check out the full listing at wisys.org. And remember, we will be looking at all student presentations from today for our Commercial Relevance Award that will be announced at the August 11th showcase. So stay tuned for more information around that. But on behalf of WiSys, thank you again for joining us, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.